patrons.
Hi, everyone.
It is a day of the week. That's what it
It is
is.
a day of the week. We typically record on days of the week.
Yeah. Historically is what we've done. Historically, we've released episodes on days of the week, and I think we'll
Yeah,
just keep doing that.
I think it's a trend that's worked for us so far.
So far. So far, so good. God, I don't remember when I assigned when we sort of picked this up. Let's just say it was like 3 weeks ago, maybe.
Yeah, so folks, we are recording about brainwash today. Brainwashing has been on our list for years. Um,
Did you,
so we wanted to kind of start unpacking that a little bit.
did you read the paper I sent you?
I did not get a chance to read that. Let me pull it up right now while we work on stuff.
There's a lot of repetition in there. I think the most of the important content's in like the first 3 pages, probably. I essentially I had forgotten all about, like, I knew that I'd written it, but I couldn't remember any of my points or arguments or anything about it. But essentially I think what I landed on was that the sort of two main points are: under what conditions does someone call someone's behavior brainwashed?
Uh-huh.
And um what could possibly be going on in the condition, in the situation where we call something brainwashed, if that is actually a thing.
Okay. Yeah, and I get into that in the notes, so that's perfect. So there's some
Great.
alignment there, which is cool. I also like that in a grad school paper you use religion as an example of brainwashing.
Multiple times, in fact.
Yeah, huh? Yep. Uh-huh.
Matter of fact, they were probably my primary target. I went after them a lot.
Uh-huh. Religion by itself is sometimes referred as brainwashing, but more commonly it is the extremist religions which merit such a title. I still align with that. That's fair. And I also like the measure of extremeness is an utterly arbitrary one. I love that I can read this and I'm like, that's you. Like I know that's you based on how your writing is.
Yeah, it's really clearly
I
my
can even hear
voice.
that. It's
Yeah.
utterly arbitrary.
Yes, this is true. This is true. What day did we say this comes out?
The 20th. So our last like full on episode before the end of the year.
Yep. Hmm.
Yeah, I think what you've got here is like a pretty good discussion point that we can have in the episode because I don't know that there's like really essentially what we land on is like it's just and like you and I kind of land on the same thing with the paper, which is just at the end of the day, like it's just behavior that's under control of antecedent stimuli with specific learning histories and specific contingencies that shape up this behavior. Um, and so like there's no it doesn't really make sense to call something brainwash like somebody brainwashed because it doesn't help address the conditions in which that behavior would occur.
Right. Yes, very
Finally,
much
one can
so.
simply say, "Prove it." There are no definite tactics for a successful verbal engagement, but they may help. So, yeah, that's very clearly your voice in there.
Hmm. Are you like this?
Would you call me?
I've got it. I was saying I wanted to check my audio and my GarageBand was acting up.
Oh, always GarageBand causing a problem. We watched I feel like my son does not have the same nostalgia for some movies that I do, obviously.
Yeah.
He's 10 and I'm 37, so we have different viewpoints on things. So I personally think it's blasphemous to have any other Home Alone movies besides 1 and 2. Um
That's all I've
that's just
seen.
my that's the if I'm being honest, it's all you need to see. So he has been obsessed with watching all of them just because he's like, because the joke is like, oh my god, there's no other movies. It's like there are 3 other movies, 4 other there's 4 other there's 6 Home Alone movies altogether. Um and so
Oh.
so we've been watching them, and man, they are so bad.
I
And
can't even imagine.
they just get so bad. Um They're the one that we just watched was Home Alone 4, and it's like Take Back the House or something like that. Um, and it is a direct sequel to Home Alone 2.
Wow.
Um, where the characters are the same, the cast is all different, but the characters are all the same. So Kevin McAllister is the main kid.
Okay.
Um, Peter McAllister has left his family and married
Sure.
into a royal family.
As one does.
So as one does. So the whole premise is um that the crooks, the villains, are going to kidnap one of the royal kids. So they elevate the kidnapping at this point in time. And it's Marv. So it's Daniel Stern's character, but and Marv's wife, because apparently Marv was married.
Who knew?
Um who knew? And Marv is played by French Stewart, not Daniel Stearns. Very different character actor.
Oh.
It is horrendous. It's a horrendous movie.
Um, God, there's 6 of when was the most recent one?
I think like 2 years ago. It's
That's
called Home
abs-
Sweet Home Alone. Ellie Kemper is in it.
how? Why?
I do appreciate that they flipped the premise on its head a little bit. Like it
Okay.
was, but that's what makes that movie a little bit cruel, is that you don't like the kid that's setting the traps, but you like the people that are getting hit by the traps. So it's like
Oh
mean.
no.
Like you're like, oh, I don't like that. Like they're just trying to like save their house. So I mean they went about it in a stupid way, but they were just trying to save their house. It's a
Um,
weird premise flip, but
Lauren was just watching this and I saw a little bit of it. They just did the walk of like the star fame thing for Macaulay
yeah.
Culkin. And like Catherine O'Hara did the whole speech thing for him. It seemed like it was very tearful and full of love.
Yeah, it seemed very like joyous.
Catherine O'Hara is so great. I just
Yeah,
love
she's
her.
wonderful.
Yeah.
She was in the first Home Alone movie. I think that she was supposed to be like 36 or 37. Like that's like the like that was her age in the movie.
Uh-huh.
So I'm just like, man, is that I feel like she looked like she was in her, like, not look, but like her style. Maybe it's just like the 90s style. Everybody just looked older, but like I assumed that she was like in her 40s, just based on her hairstyle and fashion alone.
I mean, yeah. We rewatched Hook recently. And it Maggie Smith was only
Uh-huh.
I want to say in her like late 40s when they did that. So they put her
What?
in like a ton of old lady makeup to make her look older than she was, which is why Maggie Smith looks like she hasn't aged um since the 90s.
Yeah,
It's because she's been
that's
playing old
wild.
characters, but has like actually been getting older. Which I think, Christopher Lloyd kind of did that too. And I was like, I feel like that's the way to do it, honestly. Is like make yourself look
Yeah.
older than you are, and then you look like you don't age ever.
Yeah, that's funny. I'm because now I'm like thinking about how old he was in the Back to the Future movies.
Yeah, I think he was also in his like late 40s, early 50s.
Yeah, he was 46 when he played Doc Brown.
He's less than 10 years older than we are now. And he's supposed to be this white-haired old man scientist, mad scientist.
he was he was 46 when he filmed that in
Yes.
1984.
See, that's brilliant. I would love to do that.
Oh, that's so great.
And he plays like an old guy in the Page Master and
Oh yeah, he's the wizard in that.
yeah, man, I haven't rewatched that in a long time. I wonder how
Speaking
well
of
that
Macaulay
movie holds
Culkin,
up. Yeah, right? That was a fun movie that as per my recollection, which is probably wildly inaccurate, but
I remember being fun. The like the and just like the wholesomeness of like I think I related to that character so well because I was like, I want to check out every book.
yeah,
Like I get wanting to check out more than like, let me have all three, please, Christopher
yeah.
Lloyd. I
It kind
promise
of
you I'll read
aligned
them.
with never ending story in that way, like because that's told through the eyes of the character who's in the library reading the book, who like sneaks into the
Yeah,
library to get the forbidden book that he is
yeah.
reading. So
I love that. That's so fun. I
yeah,
love movies about books. That's so great.
book club.
Yep. You know what? That's what we should do that for 2024. We should have a why we do what we do book club. I know we
Been
talked about
wanting
doing
to,
that,
yeah,
but
yeah.
we should totally get that going.
So I thought about rebooting capitalism, and you said you were already doing that for another podcast, right?
Well, we were going to, but I decided to read it on my own. So,
Oh, okay.
but I'm down to do that one. That's when we do the recap list. It's on my list of recommendations for that,
Okay.
or like books I've read. So, but I'm down to do that one.
That one does seem like I don't know. I was looking forward to it. I remember you talking about it now because you had said like he's a little nicer to capitalism than you thought he was going to be.
Yeah,
I was
I
sort
was
of
like kind
saying
of
like
surprised by that.
yeah, sort of like saying this is the system we've got, so we may as well use it to the best of its potential.
Yeah, exactly. So
Uh,
that's kind of what he lands on. So
oh, and what I've just have oh I've never really understood capitalism because I feel like the whole point is winner takes all. Like
right,
in a perfect capitalist system, eventually one person has everything and everyone else has nothing.
right,
That because I think that's the game of it, right? The game is to siphon all things down into the smallest number of people.
right. Yeah, it's to collect wealth. I mean,
Yeah.
that's like the ultimate goal of capitalism. So
Well, to collect wealth by taking away from others, like a zero sum game.
right,
Like the only
right,
way to get wealthy is to take other people's resources.
right.
Um, and
Under the auspice of like we're competing.
right.
Like capitalism makes the like it makes competition, which there's an argument to be said in there, I guess. But um, I don't know. It's not great, is all I'm saying.
Well, and I've always wondered, I'm like, does that have to be the system to allow competition? Um, couldn't you
Right.
have a competition where it's not a winner takes all system? Um,
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm sure it's possible. We should interview our I have a friend who's an economics professor at Oxford. We should interview him on that.
cool. That would be fun.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to just hear his overall thoughts before we jump in blind, but that reminds me, we did 0 interviews in 2023. Um,
Whoa.
yeah. And someone I had talked to about doing an interview back in like May, I just got back in touch with. Um, and about doing AI because he's not a behavior analyst, but he knows a lot about behavior analysis and the philosophy of behavior analysis, and he's really into computers and programming stuff, and so
Yeah.
he also really understands AI, and so we had this sort of philosophical back and forth email between he and my bosses and I, um, and me, I would be the object in that sentence, about this, and and so I thought he'd be a really good person to have on to sort of get into a little bit of discussion about like what is AI, how do we understand it, behavior analytically, that sort of thing. I
Yeah.
thought that'd be really cool. And also, I was talking to Ashley Greenwald about doing a follow up to the the medulla,
Medulla
doula,
oblongata episode.
yeah, doula oblongata, episode, possibly talking about postpartum, but also one of the topics I've been wanting to touch on is the decreased like healthcare for Black women and around
Yeah,
pregnancy. So we might. It sounds like we have 3 or 4 great interviews lined up for next year already.
yeah. We got to make up for it.
And we also only did 4 nostalgias this year, like basically on average 1 per quarter.
Yeah,
Um, when we talked about doing 12, so
yeah. We talked about doing one every month.
we generated a monstrous amount of content this last year.
Yeah,
Um,
which is
on our
funny
own.
because we got down to like, yeah, I was gonna say we got down to like just you and I writing notes now.
Yeah, yeah, it was a wild year. So I'm excited to see what next year holds, I guess. But if we can plan at least 3 or 4 interviews and more nostalgia episodes and the minis coming out, I think we'll be in much better shape. But
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
all right, anyway, we should get this episode recorded because we've
Yeah,
been
let's do
stalling.
it. Let's record brainwashing.
Okay. I'm gonna start my AI summary.
Got it.
Okay. All right, ready to count down?
Uh-huh.
All right. 3, 2, 1, go. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I need my brain cleaned host, Abraham.
And I am your under mind control host, Shane.
Mine took a second because the cleaning was in progress.
Oh
Uh,
yeah. Well, the Roomba got stuck.
the mind Roomba. Um, anyway, we're a psychology podcast. We talk about the things that people do, and sometimes we talk about the things that people maybe don't do, how we understand them, and we like to. Damn, I thought I was kicking this thing.
Nope.
And we like to unpack terms and ideas that we feel like we've all just sort of accepted are there, and then maybe they're not there in the way that we think they are, or maybe there's a better way to understand them. I mean, we talk about other things too. We talk about economics, we talk about business, we talk about animals, we talk about pseudoscience. We also talk about holidays.
We do. So today, on the day that this episode comes out on December 20th, it is National Sangria Day. So if you
Wow.
enjoy fruit wine, I guess.
Sure. It's also cathode ray tube day, a technology of the past that is disappearing into the rear view faster than we can say its name.
Yeah, it's what a wild that feels like a very 50s like sci-fi experiment, cathode rays. Um it's also dot your eyes day. So with your handwriting, make sure you do that.
Oh, I thought you meant just put dots into your eyeballs, just the
Oh
pen or
yeah.
something.
Well, there's tattoo artists that do that, but they say not to because it seems like it's
Uh,
really dangerous. You could lose your
yeah,
eyes.
that's fair. Um, One of my all-time favorite, if I understand it the way I want to understand it, which is Games Day. So
Yeah,
yes,
that is what it is.
please, great.
That's your day.
I am
Um,
here for it.
yes, and then to further like while you're playing games, I'm gonna go caroling because it's also go caroling day.
Lovely.
Mhm.
One would not want me caroling with them. That would be a disaster for everybody involved.
I would want
Um,
you with me.
you would want me until I opened my mouth and started creating a
That's okay.
noxious gas-like odor that was my singing and would knock
No, let's do
everyone
it.
out within earshot.
Yeah, we'll be like the Grinch of caroling. It'll be great.
Um, have you seen that show, Let Me See Your Voice?
No.
Okay. Basically, they have people come on who are like really terrible at singing, and then they will lip sync to songs, and the people will try and guess whether they're actually good at singing or actually bad at singing.
Oh,
Um,
that's kind of fun.
yeah, Ken Jeong hosts it. And anyway, I would be one of the bad at singing ones. The
Me
level
too.
of bad that they are is remarkable. Just FYI. Anyway, back on track for holidays. It is Sacagawea Day, and that one's important. We need to acknowledge our indigenous peoples.
Absolutely. It's also Poet Laureate Day,
Mm.
which I always read as Poet Laureate Day, which is a very different, I think, experience.
Christmas bird count week. So if all of you birders out there, keep track of your Christmas birds, report your numbers. We'll see what people see.
Yeah, I mean, I assume that by this point in time, you'll have at least 12 partridges.
Fair enough. Maybe
It's also,
maybe some geese.
yeah, like probably way too many geese.
Yeah.
I would imagine at this point in time. It's something like, I don't know, like hundreds of geese at this point. Um, it's also cookie exchange week. So make sure you share with your friends.
And you can combine that with the fact that it's gluten-free baking week, so you get gluten-free cookies. Or if you
Yeah.
like the people you're giving them to, not gluten-free cookies. Oh,
Oh, take that, gluten-free industry, big gluten,
just kidding,
and
just
all
kidding,
that
just kidding.
fun stuff.
I've
We're
had
just
very
kidding.
good gluten-free cookies.
Yeah, yeah. I have a friend who's a gluten-free baker, and she makes really rad stuff. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, full support there. It's
Oh, and you know,
also
sorry, since we're talking about cookies, you know how you can tell the difference between a vegan cookie and a not vegan cookie?
how
You can't.
that's
There's,
cookies. Cookies is cookies.
yeah.
It's also Saturnalia,
Oh,
so there's that too. Yay!
I think that was a maybe a Circa Survive album.
It feels like it. It probably
Maybe
was.
not.
It sounds like it would be, or like a Hopes Fall record.
It does sound like it would be one of their records. It was being intimately familiar with their albums. I know that it is not, and now I need to go
Yes.
listen to all their albums. So thank you for putting me on that path.
Yeah, of course.
Anyway, if you if you like what you hear today beyond the holidays, that might be your jam, but you're probably here for other reasons. Thank you for joining us. We're happy to have you. If you're joining us for the first time and you would like to support us after you hear the great job that we do talking about today's topic, which we'll get to in just a second, you can join us on Patreon, pick up some merch, leave a rating and review, like and subscribe, share us with some friends, possibly scrub why we do what we do into someone's brain. Do it gently and kindly, though,
Yeah.
not in an aversive way.
Yes.
And that would be some support. And I'll talk more about those ways that you can support us at the end of today's topic. But Shane has an important question for us and getting this kicked off.
So, in this episode, we ask the question, what do LSD, Charles Manson, the moon, and Guyana have in common? Um, and I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised. Super interesting stuff going on here.
Is it that they all have a dark side?
Honestly, I think at this point, when we get to the end of this episode, yeah, that's probably it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Should we introduce our topic or should we leave them hanging a little bit while we do a little bit more intro?
We've got so much intro. No, I think we can go ahead and dive in. We are talking about brainwashing today. And brainwashing is, I think, this term that is grossly overused,
Yeah.
and with very little understanding of what it actually is, if it is even a thing. So
Yeah.
I think we should
I
probably
bet
unpack that a little bit.
I bet you saw the episode title and knew that already. But yeah, we're talking about brainwashing, and we're going to do our best to take a skeptical scientific chisel to this nebulous lump of an enigmatic coal. I
Hmm.
guess that's an expression. At least I'm making it one now. And
It is
we're gonna
now.
see what we can find by chiseling away the chunks at what lies underneath. So let's start by defining our terms. Brainwashing is, quote, the process of pressuring someone into adopting radically different beliefs by using systematic and often forcible means. And to that point, we're actually going to try our hand at some maybe alternative ways of describing what brainwashing is, because some of that is a little too nebulous, I feel like, to adequately understand the phenomenon, which we'll get to as we unpack it.
Yes, we're gonna spend a little bit of time on this. So the definition that we just described doesn't really cover what is commonly understood as brainwashing. So a more specific definition is a forcible indoctrination to induce someone to give up basic political, social, and or religious beliefs and attitudes and to accept contrasting regimented ideas. So
Mm.
essentially, it says you believe this, we're going to make you not believe that, and we're going to make you believe pretty much the opposite of what you believed before. And now you're going to go out into the world with that new belief system.
Yeah, and make you do that through a particular a means that we'll unpack as we go. But yeah, this is sometimes referred to as mind control, coercive persuasion is a pretty good description of it, actually.
Yeah.
Beep. Thought control, thought reform, or forced re-education.
Yeah, and none of those things sound fun.
No,
When you really
no,
think about it.
I don't want that for myself or anyone else.
No. So there is actually a really interesting history with this. The term was originally coined by uh The term was originally coined by Edward Hunter, an American journalist and expert in propaganda. As he was working on reporting news from various regions in Asia, he began to read various accounts, like articles and books and stuff from that time, about mass re-education programs in the People's Republic of China.
Yikes.
Ew.
When you are enumerating the vials of another culture, you are already in dangerous territory, I think.
Yes.
So, in his 1950s, what's the word to say this exactly? The color, I don't know. What I'm trying to say is like, I'm going to tell this through my own xenophobic sort of lens. Let's just say that. In
Yeah,
his
that's what he's doing.
1950s book, Brainwashing in Red China is the title he gave it. Alarms
Uh-huh.
and flags all over the place. He provided an accounting of the process used to indoctrinate citizens into beliefs and attitudes that aligned more with Maoist views. So it was essentially just more pro state friendly ideology. We love the government. We love our leader. We will follow and do whatever is expected of us in this particular government setting.
Yes. So that brings us to a new segment on the show called Shane's History Corner. I think that we need a little bit of information here to be able to kind of contextualize that. So
Right.
Mao Zedong was the leader of the People's Republic of China from 1949 to 1976. He is considered a prominent figure in relation to communist rule. He's like one of the figureheads of communist rule. And
Sure.
some argue, and this is some of the discussion that was being had about this particular topic.
Yeah.
Some
Not our
argue that he was
opinion.
a great, not our
What
opinion.
people have said.
Um, People have said this. Some people say that he was a great leader because he was credited with transforming China into a world leader by bringing in women's rights, healthcare, and primary education to the country. But also, 40 to 80 million people died due to his policies. So, not so good. Complicated, but not sounding great. It really kind of one of those things that we have to kind of, we're not history buffs, but we wanted to give you a little bit of context about what's going on here. So, the Maoist views that we're talking about are doctrines, attitudes, and beliefs that align with Mao's political views and practices. So again, very state-oriented, very Communist Party-oriented, very towards that type of political leaning.
This has been Shane's History Corner.
And I wasn't even drunk for it.
Back to our author here, the xenophobe person. Maybe jingoist also. Edward
Yeah.
Hunter. His introduction of the term brainwashing might not have been a coincidence. This is fun speculation, but, and we've talked about this in the past, he was a former employee of the Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, the predecessor for the Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA, in the United States. If you're familiar with the history of the CIA, you know that they don't always do the most upstanding things, and talking MK Ultra type stuff here
Uh-huh.
as some history. So anyway, we know that he also has a relatively unsavory, or a history, I guess, with an what we might be considered an organization with unsavory past activities. I'm
Yes.
being way too coy here.
Yeah. Well, ultimately what we're saying is that he is linked to an organization that is known for doing bad things.
Yeah.
And also this is at a time where people are very afraid of communism,
Yeah.
especially coming out of World War II. So it stands to reason that there is a good chance that he was involved in kind of maybe creating some propaganda around this. So it is alleged that Edward Hunter, having direct ties to the CIA at the time and being an expert in propaganda, by the way, he wasn't just a journalist, he was also an expert in propaganda.
That makes
Um,
sense.
he introduced brainwashing as a term to bolster anti-communist sentiments at the time, linking this bad thing to China, brainwashing to China. It's a fairly easy fear-mongering tactic, and basically kind of says they can wipe our brains and make us believe that anything that we don't want to. That's kind of the scare there. And so, while to be charitable, it's very possible he was just kind of reporting based on his own viewpoints and political leanings. There is that kind of like fun little nugget of like, is the government involved in this?
Yeah, I think that eh, I mean, this is not something that has gone away either. I think this is still used in sort of these not semi, full fear mongering ways. This is still used to, I think, push this idea of fear and fear mongering. I think that this is used to say like these, college universities are brainwashing your children,
Hmm.
and or on the other way around, these liberal news networks are brainwashing your viewers. Oh, and I guess that's the same. That's the same way around. Oh, let's do it this way then. The conservative talk shows are brainwashing their viewers. You can spin it
Sure.
however you want, but the idea embedded inside of that is this: someone else can make you believe something that you would not have otherwise believed by essentially erasing what important parts of your mind would have stopped you from believing that thing. Does that sound like
Right.
that kind of colloquially captures it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, what they're doing is it's a way to other a group by saying that they can make you believe what they want you to believe through
Yeah.
this kind of process, right? And so brainwashing in itself sounds scary, and then it's also a really catchy term. Brainwashing is real, especially at a time where people don't really understand psychology that well. I mean, you really think about like that when this first came out, we were talking about kind of the emergence of more psychological practice. Like this is after World War II, where they're doing more assessments. They're looking at shell shock. They're looking at all these things that are coming up as far as like psychology goes. It's becoming more of an everyday thing. And so now you throw terms like brainwashing out, which sounds really fancy and sounds really scary, and then you attach that to another group. So, I mean, it's a perfect formula for propaganda.
Yeah, I mean that you're right. That is a great marketing term. I think people hear it, they immediately have some emotional, visceral thoughts and reaction about what it could be. And some of the best, I think maybe not best, but most capable brainwashers out there are advertisers.
Uh huh. Nice. I was like hoping that you were going to tie that in because I was thinking about
Yeah.
a way to tie that in too. So that was perfect.
Actually, they're terrible at it because we just ignore them. Hopefully, you were able to do that too. But let's get into more of the history of brainwashing here, particularly as it pertains to the people who are pointing the finger while doing the quote unquote brainwashing.
Yeah, so I call this section MK Ultra, not the band, or doth do protest too much. So the US has told us already that brainwashing is bad, right? That's what they're saying. They published this book, they're kind of making a public statement, hey, brainwashing is bad. But then they go, wait a second. So in the 1960s and 70s, the US actually attempted to weaponize quote unquote brainwashing techniques through a project called through a program called Project MK Ultra. You've probably heard the term, but maybe don't know the depths of what this thing is.
We've definitely at least referenced it multiple times on this show. But yeah, I mean, honestly, it's kind of funny. They made up a term in sort of a xenophobic propaganda and then decided, oh, we should use that to our advantage. I'm like,
Yes.
you just pretended it existed in the first place, and now you want to use it as a weapon. That's like saying, like, I'm gonna go look for unicorns, and by the way, I'm gonna start making unicorn horn weapons right now. I'm
Uh
like,
huh.
what? What is
Yeah,
happening?
it's a wild like I mean it makes your head pivot so quickly. It's so crazy.
It does, it does. So, and anyway, a little description here is necessary. MK Ultra, not the band, was an illegal human experimentation program. Illegal because it's not legal.
Right.
What they did was wildly inappropriate. Not They did not gain consent. This is the 60s and 70s. That understanding of consent was well understood at this point.
Sure.
And this was directly implemented by the CIA. And the history on this is bonkers. So we're not going to do a
Uh
super
huh.
deep dive, but understanding that basically this started with Nazis, as most terrible things do.
Yes. So I bet you didn't think we were going to take that swerve. So this actually started with Nazi scientists in Germany. They had experimented with the idea that various substances might be useful in influencing people as a sort of truth serum. The idea of a truth serum came from Nazi Germany. And by using substances to, quote, eliminate the will of the person examined, end quote, they could essentially control everything the person said and did in so many words. So the idea was the kind of the research question came from Nazi Germany and Nazi scientists, and the U.S. was like, let's see what that looks like.
Now, if you're going to try and write in or leave a comment to apologize for the Nazis or talk about all the good things they did, save it. We
Yep.
don't care.
Nope.
And no, that is, we're not, no one here needs to defend Nazis. Go
Right.
read a book that is not about Nazis, maybe learn something, and save your comments for yourself. Anyway,
Right.
um, MK Ultra is essentially said to be a continuation of the type of research that, yeah, you were just talking about, this whole truth serum idea.
Hmm.
And as a result of Operation Paperclip, the program that hired Nazi scientists after World War II to come work for the US government, oftentimes in NASA, maybe exclusively in NASA, in exchange for their immunity for their
War crimes.
participation in the Holocaust.
Right. So if you are not familiar with that history, I mean, I feel like a lot of our folks are, but if you've never heard of Operation Paperclip, the reason that we got to the moon was because of the Saturn rockets that were not American
Yeah.
inventions. They were created by Nazi rocket scientists and engineers. So if you wonder how we got to the moon and got to the moon successfully, it was because the United States government enlisted Nazis to help build them.
Yeah. Why were there so many white people with accents running NASA at the time?
Yep.
That's
Yep.
why.
That's why. So the scope of MK Ultra was huge, and it included. So first of all, that's tying it back to the first question. That's where the moon comes in.
Oh, there we go. Great.
So the scope of MK Ultra was huge, including the using drugs for coercion, and interrogation and disruption through strategic means. So ultimately, the drug of choice used for the program was lysergic acid diethyl diethyl diethyl
Dynamite.
diethylamide.
There you
Beep.
go.
Diethylamide. Or much easier to say, LSD. So
Yeah.
that's where that comes in. So one day we are going to do a deep dive on LSD because I think that in itself is a fascinating thing.
Oh,
But
yes. Very interesting.
that's they thought that LSD was going to be the way into controlling people.
Yeah, yeah. The first guy apparently who tested it like thought that he had drank spoiled milk or something of that nature. I don't know.
Uh-huh.
He took something like 100 times the dose a person might take today just because he had no idea. He's like, oh, maybe it'll be
Yeah.
about this many milligrams, and then was like for a whole day was just out. Um,
Yeah.
so there's that. Fun. That would be actually a really fun episode to do.
Yeah.
Particularly in under both understanding how it affects the brain and debunking the myths about how it affects the
Yes.
brain, because there is a
Yes.
lot of, just like everything else, there's just a lot of propaganda packed into the rhetoric around understanding LSD and what it does. So,
Absolutely.
in these experiments, though, what they were doing is this with LSD, they included administering LSD to institutionalized patients, prisoners, vulnerable populations, drug
Uh-huh.
addicts, sex workers, and these people, because as the agency put it, they wanted, quote, people who could not fight back, end quote,
That's a direct
which
quote.
yeah, when you say that, you are on the wrong side of history. Like,
Right.
if that is an acknowledgement that you have crossed a line into being the villain. Just pointing that out. Um, in one experiment, they continuously administered LSD to an institutionalized patient for 174 consecutive days. That is a
Ooh.
wild ride that no one should be forced to go on.
Yes. And so this is all under the idea that we can use this to control people and get them to believe what we want to believe, right? So this program also included dosing objects that might be grabbed by enemy operatives, so like pens, cigarettes, and stuff like that, and
Sure.
drugging water supplies in towns to send citizens into a tizzy. So they were trying to see, like, on a mass level, if they could get an entire city's worth of people under control.
Right. So all of this was developed with the goal to essentially, as we noted earlier in talking about page project paperclip, they wanted to wipe the will, if you will, quote unquote, wipe it away, and allow the interrogations and the control to go more smoothly. They'd be able to essentially get them to say and do what they wanted them to do if they forced them into these situations with enough coercion, with enough drug administration, that they'd be amenable to suggestions such that they would do things they would not otherwise do, essentially saying, we can create human puppets that will do our bidding to specification. That was the goal.
Right. And I mean, as a government who wants to control the people, that sounds like a pretty great tool, right? Like, if my goal is
Yeah.
to get hundreds or thousands of people under my control, then the best thing to do is to figure out a way to wipe their will so they will do everything I say. And I think it's also important too to recognize that these experiments were one illegal and they were not just taking place on U.S. soil. So these experiments were under that were specifically under MK Ultra took place in secret detention camps across the world to avoid any sort of legal action. So when they were dosing
Sure.
cities, it wasn't just in the United States. There were camps set up in many parts of Europe, East Asia, and in Japan, West Germany, and in the Philippines. So this was happening all over the world.
Yeah. And it's just, I don't know, it's unfortunate. I think unfortunate is way too gentle of a way to put it. It's gross. Like, this is gross
Yeah.
thing that people have done to each other. It's one of those things where you read about it and you start to have the thought, like, maybe humans do suck and don't deserve to keep going. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like I'm optimistic about humans, and I think most humans are good and good to each other, but the bad ones seem to get a lot of power a lot of the time.
Yeah,
I
and
don't
I
know.
mean this is kind of a thing that's happened, and it's unfortunate because as we mentioned earlier, this idea of brainwashing being in kind of like the tests that were run by the United States government at the time, were really ultimately targeting those vulnerable populations, those marginalized groups. And so we talked about this on the syphilis episode as well,
Yeah.
where the medical experiments were exposing the Black community. You talk about the war on drugs, which again was attacking marginalized groups. And so we have a pretty unsavory history with this in the United States. And I think, brainwashing is just another kind of jewel in that crown, if you will.
And it's unfortunate too because as we'll talk about when we get to LSD, it's very possible that some use of some of these drugs, and thinking about the war on drugs as well, could be
Which drugs won, by
therapeutic.
the way.
Yes, they did. Um, some of these drugs could be therapeutic. They could be used as medicine. They could be beneficial to people, but instead we turn them into politics. I was just kind of thinking as we were talking through this, I kind of would like to go back to the days where everyone was just mad at politicians all the time, like all
Uh-huh.
politicians, rather than
Yeah.
as like worshiping these political figures as like they can do no wrong. Whatever they do, it's fine. And like, what happens? Like, let's just all be angry at all
Yeah.
politicians because they chose a career of being in the position like the MK Ultra people were, of like they're controlling the rules that govern the masses. And it's irritating and frustrating, and we're mad at all of them for doing that rather than picking sides. Like, we're on the
Right.
side of the people and not the sort of authoritarian control that so many people desire to have. So anyway, getting off track, back to brainwashing. What does it do? How do we do it?
So, the argument is that brainwashing essentially makes you disregard or disavow previous belief systems and adopt new views or new beliefs, almost like a reset button on your entire worldview. That's kind of what the idea is. I can take you into a space, wipe away anything that you previously believed, and I can give you new beliefs. And in this process should be I mean, the argument is it should be fairly simple, pretty straightforward, and nearly perfect. And it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Damn it, I thought I had something to say on that. Yeah, fuck it. So there are some basic techniques that some groups might use as part of their brainwashing procedures. Now, need to give you a little heads up as we go forward on this. Some of this will overlap with other types of abuse and gaslighting. You might hear some of that has that sort of Venn diagram. There's some similarities
Yeah.
there. But stick with us for a minute while we continue the discussion. There are two major contexts in which brainwashing is considered to be quote unquote more effective. And I do think as we unpack this, there's sort of a couple ways to talk about brainwashing. One is the condition under which, like, or what are the conditions that are occurring that lead to what we might call someone having been or what we might call brainwashing, where the effect appears to be there, and under what conditions do we use the word brainwashing to label what has happened. We've kind of unpacked a little bit the second one, and we're going to go more into that a little bit later, but I think this is starting to get into more of the first one, which is how does it what conditions create these circumstances of sort of altered behavior, if you will.
Right. And so in order to kind of, I guess, set the occasion for this idea of brainwashing to occur, there are essentially two different ways, two different contexts in which they do this. And it's either going to be through social influence or isolation and dependency. Through social influence, this describes a process that exposes the individual to change based on large groups of others and what they're doing. And there's kind of a model for what's expected of the victim, and they are pressured or influenced by larger social groups. This is often seen in cults where somebody, I mean, religions is what I meant to say, like Scientology, where somebody gets in and they are pressured by their peers in that group. And there's other things that happen within that, but there's kind of a large group of people engaging in a certain behavior, and then you get kind of othered out until you start engaging in the same behaviors.
Right. And the other, as you mentioned, isolation and dependency. And again, these are not mutually exclusive. These go together. And this is
Yeah,
another tactic that effectively isolates a victim from their loved ones, their social networks. It makes them either that makes them dependent on either the person who's doing the brainwashing or the entire group as a whole to which they now belong.
right.
And then the person who again is sort of the controlling agent, the brainwasher, if you will, is able, it will specifically, not as able to, but they will specifically dictate and use coercive action to control the victim's sleeping, eating, toilet use, and other basic needs. And I mean, you also see this in abusers and like spousal abuse or partner abuse, where they will also do this. They'll control the very things that they do as part of their daily actions. And yeah, as you said, cults are a really good example of this. Good in the sense that they are a comprehensive, relatively comprehensive example. But yeah, that's the isolation piece can be really important because it essentially allows them to create a new insulated social network that dictates the kinds of things that you say and believe, and it's like a microculture, if you will, that
Mhm.
highly governs the path that you're on.
Right, absolutely. And so one thing that we here at Why We Do What We Do, we don't believe in isolating people. So what we would ask you to do is while you're listening to this episode, please share with your friends so that they can also hear these ads.
Nice.
Thanks.
Hmm. The coughing has dropped off. It's like mostly gone. I will be recording in the new house next week. I'm almost
Yeah,
positive. The thing is, we don't
no
have internet there
worries.
yet, but we should be
Well, I'm
getting it
not,
installed this week.
and
So,
I'm out next week. That's why we're
oh,
recording
that's
two
right.
episodes today.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Okay. All right. Beep. And we're back. So,
Yay!
welcome to the group of non-isolationists, inclusive group that is the
Mhm.
podcast. Now that we understand the context of how brainwashing sort of takes place and sort of the strategies often used there, and let's talk about the steps that are used that are described in how to quote unquote brainwash someone. So, psychologist Robert J. Lifton studied POWs, which for those of you who see those flags around, it stands for prisoners of war. You probably know that, but just in case
Yeah.
you weren't sure, these POWs from Korean and Chinese war camps, and determined that brainwashing occurs in a series of steps. This is based on the description from those in the camps. So this is not a like empirically tested, scientifically validated description of what's happening. This is just sort of a collection of narratives to help give some description to it. However, since the damage beep. And obviously we wouldn't want to empirically test this because this would there would be a lot of damage done. It'd be
Yeah, it'd be
highly
really bad.
unethical. We're not going to test this on people because it's bad and we don't want to do bad things to people. And so all we really have to go on anyway is the stories that they have. And that's fine, I think, for understanding what it is. I think the best we can do essentially is do a post hoc descriptive analysis to try and prevent these things in the future more than I would ever, and I would never, to be clear, recommend that we try and do like experimentation with this.
Right, absolutely. So, there are three basic steps or basic stages of brainwashing that are commonly discussed. The first one is going to be breaking down the self. And essentially what happens here is that through isolation and deprivation and manipulation, all the brainwasher works to make someone question their identity. And there are four kind of tactics underneath that. Basically, they assault the identity, they make that person feel guilty about certain things. There's self-betrayal where the person starts kind of like questioning their own identity, their own things that they've done. And then there's the breaking point where the person ultimately ends up asking the question of who am I? Like who am I to have, like, in a lot of those questions kind of in that space are like, I can't believe that you let your friends die. I can't believe that you would follow a belief where, you know, this could put family at risk. It's like all of these things that kind of make the person feel really bad about who they are and the things they do in their belief systems, and kind of breaks it down and makes it more malleable so that they can go into ways to get out of that.
So once you have done that, you have cracked the foundation, you have made them question everything about themselves, who they are and what they stand for and what their values are, etc. Now you then offer the possibility of salvation. So the brainwasher gets to play good cop. They can be kinder, offering basic necessities, showing that things don't have to be so bad. Once they've sort of broken your spirit, now there's like, hey, I am your path. Come with me. The
Mm-hmm.
brainwasher has an opportunity to confess. They might share some guilt or confess that the person had been wrong previously. This is essentially the bridge work that they use to get to the following steps that we'll get to. So using guilt is an important tactic here as well. They'll essentially take the feeling of undirected guilt and direct it. They give the victim an opportunity to release that guilt through denouncing their previous beliefs. They basically get them to say out loud, I am the thing that I used to believe is wrong and bad. The thing that I used to value is wrong and bad. The systems that I cherished and held true were wrong and bad. I am was incorrect, and I feel bad about that. Where do I go from here?
Right. And that's what leads to the last step of this, or the last stage of this, which is rebuilding the self. And so the person's essentially been tortured into a state of blank confusion at this point in time. Like they have been broken down, they've been starved, they've been sleep deprived, they've had all these experiences. And then the brainwasher starts using language to help rebuild that person's kind of belief systems. The brainwasher will use language to guide the person toward that new belief system, whatever it might be. Abuse is stopped per se, like the actual like deprivation states and the isolation and stuff is kind of stopped. And then what ends up happening is the brainwasher starts rewarding that person who's been brainwashed, the victim. They start rewarding them for displays that align with the new worldview. And so this
Mhm.
stage eventually ends with this idea of a final confession. And that person disavows everything they previously believed, and they adopt the new system, and they are welcomed into the group. And so that's when kind of the social modeling starts to take place after they've been isolated, broken down, and then now they're brought back into a new social model.
Now, a lot of this has been sort of, I mean, I feel like it's easy enough to understand in sort of common parlance, if you will. And I think that we'll do more breaking this down in a sort of more rigorous, skeptical, behavioral, scientific way of thinking about and talking about it. And I think just a brief summary here is just to say, essentially, what they do is they use a lot of mm, um, coercive and aversive manipulation to then uh, make you miserable, then offer themselves as a path to make you happy again, and essentially get you to they just reward all the things that you do that are in line with those expectations. This actually is not terribly different in a way from, we talked about Stockholm syndrome a long time ago in a previous
Mm-hmm.
episode, which we also landed, I think, in a somewhat similar place that we will with this one, which was that like the extent to which this seems to occur is probably a little out of proportion, but it is the fact that like when you're in a situation where things have been really miserable for you, and someone then is creating a much more pleasant environment by basically doing what they ask of you, like yeah, people are going to go that way. I think it's fully expected
Right.
that they will. The extent to which they really believe it, it'll be impossible to really determine. But let's talk through some. We'll get more into that. Let's talk through some famous examples here.
Yeah, so I think when people think about brainwashing, there are a lot of different examples that come up, and I feel like we had to talk about a couple that are more in like the cultural zeitgeist that people are aware of, and maybe kind of unpack those a little bit. So first is Charles Manson. and we go back to the idea of MK Ultra and the mind control experiments and stuff. He may have been directly involved in the MK Ultra program, and some brainwashing experiments during his time in prison. There's a thought that he was part of that, and this was before he was out and prior to the Manson family murders, and so he had already been exposed to some of this stuff before he was out on release and created the cult that he ended up kind of guiding for a little bit.
Whoopsie.
Yeah, that didn't go well.
Ted Kaczynski, he spent nearly 200 hours in a potential branch of the MK Ultra project, which had lasting effects on his well-being. The experiments were, quote, purposely brutalizing psychological experiments, end quote, that were conducted at Harvard. Ted Kaczynski made famous for, was he the Unabomber?
Yes, he was the Unabomber.
Okay.
Yep.
Ted Kaczynski made famous for being the Unabomber made who lived in the woods as a hermit and made homemade bombs that he sent to people. Which
Yes.
don't do that. It's bad.
Yeah, don't do that. That's really bad. And that's not conjecture. Like that's like a well documented experience. Like he was at Harvard studying and was so if you're a grad student listening to this and you're on campus and you get asked to join an experiment, just ask the question, is this MK Ultra before you sign up?
Yeah.
Um,
How much aversive
because they
control are
have
you
to tell
using?
you. Yeah, because they have to tell you, right?
Yeah,
But
sure.
that's actually a well documented thing. It's not as much of like I guess maybe like a hypothesis like with Charles Manson. Like it's actually there.
Yikes.
Um, another example of something that really happened was Patty Hearst. Patty Hearst was kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army, and she was reportedly kept in isolation and tortured until she came to sympathize with her captors and engage in various bank robberies for which she would be tried. She was eventually fully pardoned for the crimes, and she had used brainwashing and Stockholm syndrome, as Abraham just mentioned,
Yeah.
and she used those as a legal defense for getting out of those crimes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we've covered that and probably will again and have done so here today. The
Yeah,
Manchurian Candidate. This is actually, I've never seen this movie or read this book. I feel like I need to.
I haven't either, and I've always heard it's really good.
Okay. Well, for those of you who are familiar or not, we're going to do a quick summary. This is originally a novel written in 1959. The story of the Manchurian candidate sees an American soldier captured and brainwashed to assassinate anyone they are directed to kill, sort of a sleeper agent, I think, if you will. And this brainwashing is also part of a hypnosis process with a specific trigger to set the sleeper agent off. And get them to I think they do this a lot in several spy movies. There's like the secret
Yes.
phrase. They'll like you'll get a telegraph or get a phone call that's like the orange is wearing a purple jumpsuit in the telephone booth, and then they're like must kill. Is sort of the
Yeah.
idea here.
They
This
even
and
do it
there's
in Zoolander.
they, that's right. They do it in Zoolander. This is why Tony Stark calls the Winter Soldier Manchurian Candidate in one of the movies, because his whole thing is that they can read a series of words and he will be triggered to follow directives and only speak Russian.
Yeah, it's a wild time, but it's actually one of the more famous like fictional examples of it. And it's not it's a different kind, and it's kind of one of those things that's very much so used to, if you look at like the Manchurian Candidate, right? Like the terms are very like Eastern Asian, and they're like he was a prisoner of war, he was brainwashed, and it's used as an assassination. Like it's another kind of fear mongering discussion based on the fears of the time, right? 1959 model or novel, 1959 novel that is totally writing about the fears that the public had at the time.
Why is there xenophobia and racism everywhere?
Yeah,
We
I know,
can't
shocking,
escape
right?
it.
Yeah, it's like even like great fictional stories end up using that as like a plot device, unfortunately, like
Yeah,
you could easily do that with like a soldier who had gone rogue, like the United States government, like tortured somebody as part of a secret program, and it didn't have to be Chinese government involved in that at all.
right?
Like as like this example. So in 1984, after Winston is captured for his betrayal of the state, if you're not familiar with the book 1984 by George Orwell,
Yeah, this
Winston,
is the
and this
year
is
of
a
the movie, not the
spoiler.
book.
Yeah. So spoiler alert, if you have not read this book or seen the movie or anything like that,
Yeah, this
which you
book
should
is
have at this
what,
point in time.
70 years old now?
Yeah. Yeah. It's an older one for sure. So Winston is captured
80.
for his betrayal of the state, and goes through a lengthy interrogation and torture sequence where he eventually turns on Julia, which was his love interest, and somebody that he said he would never turn on. And after an extended period of time, he is released and states that he has come to love Big Brother and loved the state. To what degree he believes that, that's a different conversation. But he's effectively kind of washed of all of his previous rebellious beliefs and now is back in love with the state.
There's a somewhat similar theme, if you will, to Brave New World, which is obviously often and
Yes.
obviously for obvious reasons mentioned in the same discussion as 1984. It basically takes the same idea, like controlling the masses, but does it through a more like medication means than a coercive means. There's some
Right.
amount of sort of like trying to incentivize, I think, but it's largely medication. And but the same idea is like they sort of will drug them, they breed them in a very specific way so that they are these sort of obedient lemmings, as it were.
Right.
And then, of course, another very famous story, A Clockwork Orange, by who's the author?
Anthony
Thank you.
Burgess.
Beep. Anthony Burgess, or I think it's Burgess. And then
Yeah.
the famous or infamous movie directed by Stanley Kubrick. Um, And just as a side note, love Stanley Kubrick, love that movie. The book is much better.
Yes.
Definitely
Agreed.
go read the book. It's, I mean, the movie's fine. Like, it's great. It's super well done. It is a good book, but I think it lacks the actual arc and narrative storytelling that is captured so incredibly well in the book. So definitely
Right.
go check out the book. Anyway, this follows the story of a character named Alex DeLarge and his friends go on a romp through Britain where they engage in some ultraviolence. Now, this is not something that is generally tolerated, so he is caught and eventually arrested. He agrees to, as part of his plea deal or some kind of deal, to an experiment that includes being drugged and forced to watch films full of sex and violence paired with Beethoven. And the whole
Uh-huh.
idea, just in here, not to is again spoiling a very old work of fiction. But
Yeah.
the idea here is essentially to sort of using Pavlovian conditioning, see our Pavlov episode,
Uh-huh.
to condition him to have a visceral, disgusted reaction to violent to violence, so that if he were
And
to try and do something violent or nefarious or delinquent, he would actually feel revolted to the sick of to the sick to the point of being in pain.
and he does. I mean, like whenever he hears Beethoven or whenever he sees violence, he throws up and he's sick and it's. So I think that's more of an example of Pavlovian respondent conditioning than it is like an example of brainwashing, but it's often used as an example of how brainwashing could work, or
Yeah.
some of the tactics that might be used as part of that.
You know what? Honestly, what makes me sick and revolted to the point of vomiting is ads.
Nailed it.
Okay, I think we've unpacked a lot of the sort of the more colloquial understanding of this, bringing in the discussion that you would find from most people in most circles. But there is like a part of this discussion that we tend to orient to and cling to and enjoy the most because we feel it is the most parsimonious, the most scientific, and that is a sort of behavioral understanding of what's going on here.
Yes. So here's where the research comes in. Now, James in 1986 provided, this is their last name, James. This was not just a person named James. I mean, they could have been
Just,
named
the
James.
James there, it's
You
just
know,
like
James.
Beyonce, it's just, or Cher, as person who has one name, their name is James. Everybody knows James.
Yeah, everybody knows James. James 86 provides a great discussion on how the lore of brainwashing can quickly outgrow the truth. And despite what we know about attempts at brainwashing and all that, the term was clearly used as a propaganda scare tactic rather than something that could actually happen the way it's described. And so they basically kind of broke down how the propaganda kind of caught fire and took off versus like the actual discussions in the empirical evidence and basically saying they didn't align.
Yeah. TAC Deer 2020. again, author, discusses how indoctrination and brainwashing might be directly related to terrorism. More specifically,
Mm,
they focus on the idea of suicide bombing. I think anything that's sort of kamikaze-ish, if you will, the suicide mission that to inflict terror, but specifically suicide bombing in Surabaya in 2018. The study highlights specific factors on how indoctrination occurred for members of the suicide bomber group that they may have contributed to the development of radical ideological beliefs. And they also cite isolation for these participants as a key factor in priming those bombers for the indoctrination to be willing to sacrifice themselves for this cause.
right. And I thought that was a pretty interesting case study on this particular
Sure.
topic.
Yeah.
Um, Sessions and Doherty in 2021 actually compares the use of coercive control and brainwashing techniques to the rise of cults. So you start seeing kind of the discussion around that, which is, why the cult thing comes up a lot. The use of physical and linguistic techniques in cults closely mirrors descriptions of brainwashing in other cases. However, they also argue that the existence of brainwashing might have led to cult stereotypes and quote unquote cultic brainwashing, making this area of study a little bit more complex and a little bit muddied. So basically, they were saying that cults seem to do all the things that are described as brainwashing. It seems to be effective for those people that are in there. However, we don't really know if it's this, that, or the other because of kind of how those terms get conflated.
Right. McKenty 2023 is an interesting analysis of the brainwash scares that were occurring during the Cold War. And specifically citing A Clockwork Orange, they discuss how literature began to emerge in direct relation to the scare, the idea of brainwashing as it being used as propaganda. And we see this kind of thing occur in media consistently, depending on whatever the scare of the moment is. You can see our Satanic Panic episode, for an example. You've got
Yeah.
QAnon, you've got Newsmax, you've got these Breitbart, basically these groups of people who their whole point is to scare people, and often they will use the specific line as part of their rhetoric. X group of people is trying to turn you into this. They're trying to take this away from you. They're trying to convert you into, they're trying to make everyone gay. They're trying to make everybody sterile. They're trying to lower testosterone. They're trying to take away your freedom. Whatever it is, it's the same exact playbook. They just dress it up with a
Right.
little something a little bit different. But the PR teams know that it works, so they just keep
Right.
using it. At least it works on some people. So
Yeah, I mean it's been effective in getting people to the, let's say, to the Capitol on, like, I don't know, let's pick a random date, January 6th or something. Like, so
yeah,
anyway, now I think what the part that we like, and I think there are a lot of ways to look at this, but I think we always kind of go with a more parsimonious viewpoint on this. And so I think it's worth unpacking some of the behavioral components to the brainwashing process that might make it kind of seem like that might get behavior to change in the way that people describe when they're describing brainwashing. So,
yeah,
first is this kind of condition of deprivation and satiation. Basically, what is happening is when you strip somebody down and strip them away from all of their basic needs, and brainwashers are in control of that, they're creating this huge motivation for those things. If you're thirsty, there's a point where you'll just kind of do or say anything to get a cup of water.
yeah.
So, and that's kind of where it starts. Like, okay, I'm going to withhold water for a period of time. And then when you're thirsty enough and you say what I want you to say, then you can have some water. And that condition of kind of being deprived of something and having control over whatever those deliverable things are, that condition makes it very easy to get people to do things you want. Whether they believe
Right.
it versus what they're doing are two different conversations, but at least they're doing the thing that the brainwasher wants. And now there's a path towards reward.
Another element that we've sort of briefly mentioned is the idea of social influence, and part of that sort of being modeling, which is to say, not going down a runway in a particular outfit, but demonstrating through your own actions the kinds of things that you would like to see other people do. And so, plenty of studies show that the majority of people will sort of quote unquote go with the grain, so to speak. If everyone around you is doing something, you're more likely to do it. And we've talked about this in a few other places as well. And and that essentially you can sort of guide people's behavior if you were to organize. This is sort of how flash mobs have kind of done this a little bit, but if you organize a
Yeah.
group of people in a place to do a particular thing, particularly if it's not, I said particular a lot, especially if it's not that outlandish of a thing. Let's just say, for example, you got like 150 people together and they went to a crowded place like I don't know if malls are still a thing. Let's say a mall, maybe some other like a Walmart or something, and you get all these people that all of a sudden they just turn and start heading one direction at a relatively high speed. The people who are around them, who are not part of that group, very well may get in on the going whatever that
Yeah.
direction is at that particular speed, and they might rationalize it any number of ways. Oh, there's something over here I need to get. Oh, there's something over there I need to get away from. Oh, like something's going on. I need to just get in with what's happening and figure it out. Or this looks like what people are supposed to do right now, so I'm going to do it. Who knows? It
Yeah.
doesn't matter. The point is that when you're around other people who are doing a thing, they help set the context for what is considered acceptable, appropriate behavior in that situation. And the more embedded you are in that situation, the more common and expected that those patterns of behavior seem, unless you're a contrarian like me.
Uh-huh. That's true. So you will see a group of people running the one way and you'll go, nah.
Yes, the icon ever the iconoclast.
Yeah. Now, there's also contingencies of punishment and reinforcement, or as we like to say, kind of like pain and discomfort or reward.
Yeah.
And so, if the conditions we described below, or that we described as part of this, in those conditions, it feels like it would be pretty easy to set up rewards for attitude changes if we wanted to, and then punish anything that didn't align with that. So, oh, you still want to fight with us? No food for today. Oh, you want food? I'll give you food for following my orders. Ta-da! I brainwashed you with pizza, and it was that easy, right? I mean,
Oh,
and
that's how they did
truly,
it.
that's how they got me. That's how I got into the world of psychology is with pizza.
That's
Um,
right.
but no, it's one of those things where if the person that is in power has total control over the basic necessities, kind of going back to satiation and deprivation, and they are doling out rewards for things they want to see, then and that's the easiest context to shape behavior towards kind of what brainwashers want to have happen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just as we said, create the situation of desperation, create deprivation, offer the incentive for doing the thing that you want, demonstrate the thing that you want, create that context so it becomes the norm. And yeah, part all of this is part of a system of coercive control. And we've mentioned that a lot, but coercive control, just a little more packing here, is something that unfortunately exists in many parts of our world. Many people have said, and I think that they're right, that we live in a negative reinforcement world, meaning most, if not, I guess most is really the word here because it's not all, but most of the things that we do are to avoid aversive consequences for not doing those things. If something is painful or aversive, we want to avoid it. If you continue to threaten me with those things, I will listen to you just to avoid them. If you have that level of control, the
Right,
brainwashers here, the control agents, they hold the keys, and because they do, they can threaten others into saying and doing what they want them to say and do. And if you let that happen long enough, you are effectively conditioning a pattern of behavior that becomes relatively difficult to escape. So I think if we ask the question, like, can brainwashing happen? A different way to phrase that is, can you use and can you manipulate circumstances, contingencies, reinforcements, and punishments effectively enough to drive the kind of behaviors you want to see? Yeah, I mean, arguably,
yeah,
that is the world we live in every day. The things that we do and the choices that we make are shaped by our environment, which is full of positives and negatives. There's full
right,
of the good and the bad. And we make decisions based on that. Now, it's a lot of chaos. It's not super well controlled. Like, I don't think there's anyone who has enough power to pull the strings to make it so that, let's say, for example, this thing feels good or sounds good or tastes bad or feels bad
right,
or sounds bad. Like that's going to be some of your subjective experience. But nevertheless, you're going to organize your behavior around that thing. You're going to
right,
show up on time so that you don't get in trouble for being late to work. You're going to pay your taxes so that you don't get investigated by the IRS. You are going to drive the speed limit so that you don't get a ticket. And those are, I mean, just human intervention things. You're also not probably going to set your head on fire because you don't want your face to melt. Like there are lots of things
fair.
that we do for practical coercive reasons as well. Um, so like that is the world we live in. And yeah, you could control those enough to get a pretty significant amount of influence over how someone then chooses their own organization of their behavior. And whether or not they believe it, again, that gets into what does belief mean? Because an enormous amount of when we talk about belief is just based on our own language and how we then choose to I guess, talk about things and the choices that we make that are in with respect to those things. But even then, like, how do you then rule out what, well, was this the coercive control that was orchestrated by another person? I don't know. So
Meh.
as I said, I think if the question rephrased is, can you manipulate someone's environment enough to get them to behave in the way you want them to? Yes, probably for the most
Right.
part, depending on like how severe the thing is that you want them to do, and how difficult it is that you want the thing that you want them to do. If it's relatively and like not that difficult, not that bad, like if all it was you were like trying to get someone to, I don't know, pickpocket somebody, you could probably get there. That one's like a relatively low stakes sort of thing that's not all
Right.
that difficult. But if you wanted to like get someone to like kill their whole family, that one's a lot harder. I mean, you could probably get
Right.
there and but it's gonna be a lot harder. So all of that also is to say, like, don't do this to anybody on purpose.
Right.
Like, we're
It is
absolutely
not
not advocating
nice.
that. Yeah, this is terrible. We don't advocate for it, and also acknowledging we live in sort of a world where there are a lot of aversive circumstances that guide our behavior, whether or not they're orchestrated by another person. There's just a plain reality to it, and that's honestly part of
Right.
evolution. Like, we evolved to be sensitive to the things that are horrible to us, and
Right.
then therefore change our behavior around that. So some people
Right.
capitalized on that.
Exactly. Exactly.
There is one other piece
So
though, which is also the like, what do we under what conditions do we call behavior brainwashed? And we don't need to go into that super deep, but to suffice it to say that I think that term is often applied in situations where it's just propaganda, as you said. And I
yeah.
think it's to describe someone else's behavior is different than it used to be in a way that I don't like.
Right.
I think that is when we see that, or someone else is doing something that I wouldn't like if I don't know them. I don't know if it's different, but someone is doing something in a way that I don't agree with and I don't like. That might be another condition under which people use the term brainwashing. So using the term is more of a I feel better about being opposed to what that person thinks, feels, and does by calling them brainwashed. And I feel righteously justified in being angry at them and the people are controlling them by saying that they're brainwashed. And that's, I think, the
Right.
conditions under which we use that term. And it is not scientific, it is not helpful, and it is actually a way of avoiding responsibility for self-reflection on how we are and how we feel about those people in the situations.
Right. Right. Well, and I was going to say too, like I think that to that point, another term that gets used in that is indoctrination. So, like,
Yes.
whenever you hear people say, like whenever they kind of throw out the term indoctrination, the way that people do today, at least in the United States, it's similar to brainwashing in that I can attribute this thing, this change, this behavior that I don't like, to something that is bad, right? Because indoctrination has taken the context of like, oh, this is a bad thing. Same thing. And so and really, when you understand it, indoctrination and brainwashing are two different things by definition. Indoctrination is the process of teaching a person or group to accept a set of beliefs uncritically, because essentially what you're doing is you're intentionally failing to teach critical thinking skills by limiting information, and kind of like avoiding providing the alternative sides or having the discussions or the skills to have the discussions. Brainwashing is that's where it includes torture, deprivation, all of those
Right.
things, some kind of aversive control. Indoctrination doesn't have the aversive control, but basically it's levels, right? Like I am providing information, I'm doing something, I'm arranging a context for you to follow up or believe in a certain belief system or attitude, or like engage in a certain set of behaviors. The difference is indoctrination is just limiting information where and kind of presenting singular views, where brainwashing is like the aversive control part.
That is such a massively important point that you just made, and I'm really glad you did because I was just thinking that of like there are also these situations where someone's essentially their entire upbringing is around, or primarily around, a set of language that espouses views and beliefs that then that person comes to adopt because that's what they've been exposed to. And that I think falls more in the camp of indoctrination, and is
Yes.
not in the camp of brainwashing. And that is also an important thing to talk about. It's at some point, maybe unpack a little bit, but I think that I'm really glad that you made that point, because you're exactly correct that and that also is an important distinction to be made, in understanding what people mean when they say brainwashing, as they're probably, in some of the circumstances at least, talking about indoctrination, which I
Right.
think is more of a shaping of one's attitudes, values, beliefs, and language around a particular set of attitudes and beliefs. And as you said, and I think massively critically important in that, is that it is eschewing and specifically avoiding teaching critical thinking.
Right. Absolutely. Now another thing I think we got to add too, and I think this is what one of my most favorite little tidbits on this, is that there are people that believe that Jim Jones is actually alleged to be an enlisted experimenter of MK Ultra.
Oh,
So
wow.
like he wasn't like a victim or a subject. He was enlisted, supposedly he was enlisted, or allegedly he was enlisted by the US government to actually run some of the MK Ultra program, and clearly that went awry. But that's an allegation that's out there right now, which I thought was fascinating.
Man, that whole project was just like a cyclone of shit, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's yes. It was really bad.
Like
One of the
everyone
many
on
bad
all
things.
sides failed.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, I think that I think we've said more or less what we want to say about this. The concept of brainwashing, as it is commonly described, does not really seem to exist, at least not in the propaganda way that it has been used.
Right.
In the extent to which it does exist, it is effectively, beep, so it is effectively social lore. We cannot wipe someone's memories or their attitudes without significant brain damage.
Right.
Instead, the extent to which it does exist, the effects of brainwashing techniques, um, are largely this use of sort of coercive control to shape someone's general behaviors and things that they probably say, but it's also likely to be short lived. Trauma related to attempts at brainwashing might be more significant and long lasting, but the extent to which someone's behavior does follow that pattern are probably going to exist only as long as the context maintains them. Once
Right.
that is removed, once they're removed from that aversive environment, once the brainwasher is no longer able to exert their control, then they will then start having their behavior come back under the influence of what their previous circumstances or their new circumstances will be. But
Right.
that the trauma can live on a long time, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate thing, but it is a thing that does happen. And I mean, I think that that's probably that's where I would ultimately land. Is like, it's a catchphrase to describe a phenomenon that is really a complex set of behavioral contingencies used for evil. So
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, unfortunately, we will have to do a little bit of sharing the evil ourselves, because we're going to play one more set of ads and then come back with some credits and recommendations.
yeah.
Okay, we need to thank all the people that help make this show happen. And then after that, we're going to, if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. We like to share some things that we love that we think you might like too. Those are our recommendations. But first, I need to tell you that without our Patreon people, this podcast could not happen. They are the best. We love them. They are what allows us to continue doing what we do. And that is Mike M, Megan, Layla, Mike T, Justin, Kim, Joshua, Brad, Stephanie, Olivia, Brian, and Ashley. Thank you all so much. We appreciate you.
Y'all are the best.
Of course, I could not do this without my team. Shane and myself do writing and fact checking, editing and production from Justin Greenhouse, and our social media coordinator is Emma Wilson. And of course, without our listeners, the show would just be Nothing. I mean, it would just be us talking to
It'd
each
be a
other, which
fun
is, I guess, not
conversation.
nothing. Yeah, it'd be a conversation, but we wouldn't have anybody who got to join us in that conversation. So we appreciate all of you listeners for being here. Thank you so much. You're the best. As I said, if you'd like to support us, you can join that group of people on Patreon. There, you get access to bonus goodies and back behind the scenes content. You can leave us a rating and review anywhere you listen to podcasts. Subscribe, share us with a friend. You can pick up some merch at our merch store. All the fun things. You can find out more about this episode by going to our website. At some point, I'll get it uploaded there. I mostly just upload it to our distribution service. I've been a little behind on the website, but you can find all of our past episodes there at least, or a lot of them.
Yeah.
And then if you would like to tell us about brainwashing, or something that you found interesting in this episode that you learned that you'd like to correct us on kindly, or any other piece of information, you should email us directly at info@wwd.wwdpodcast.com, or reach out to us on the social media platforms. You can get a hold of us there too. Not the like Nazi ones, but the not
No.
Nazi ones. I mean, I guess there's
Yes.
probably Nazis, but they're not the like primary driving force of the platform. So like we're
Right.
not on X/Twitter, we're not on Truth Social, none of Parlor, none of those. Um, but anyway, you can find us in the normal places. We'll be there. And
Yeah.
I think that's it. Am I missing anything, or is there anything you would like to add before we get to our recommendations?
No, I think that covers it for this one.
Awesome. Well, then I think it is time for recommendations.
Yay! I love recommendations.
You should definitely go first because I don't have one.
Okay, I can do that.
Hmm.
So I am recommending something that's a little bit out of my norm for things that I recommend. Usually a show or a book or some music or something like that, or maybe some food items. And this one does have food items, but it also has a wonderful show, and that is an organization called the Polynesian Fire Luau. And so they just opened a restaurant here in Daytona, down in our kind of our downtown area, which is on a street called Beach Street, which I think is really fun that we have a street called Beach Street, which is like our main strip.
Yeah.
And it is a dinner buffet with Hawaiian food and then a show where they kind of take you through all of the Polynesian, not all the Polynesian islands, but like so many Polynesian islands like Tahiti and Hawaii and all that, and kind of do different show dances and fire twirling and all the stuff, right? Kind of like, I would say, I don't want to call it standard fare, like luau show, but it was a very cool show, and like they did some really cool education stuff around like why some of the dances were the way they were, and they got some really cool crowd participation. So they had folks stand up and do the haka with them, and they taught like the different commands and the different words and what they meant and like what the meaning of the gestures were and stuff like that. So there was some really cool stuff to go with it, and it was a lot of fun. So there's a video of me somewhere doing a haka as part of this dance or this show, as a crowd volunteer, and it was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. I love that. I love that for you.
Yeah. And it was, and also to
Um,
be clear too, it's like run by people from the islands, like people who are like, it's not like a bunch of white folks came in and was like, hey, we're gonna do a Polynesian show. Like
that's good.
it's not like appropriated in that way.
Okay. Okay. That helps too. I appreciate that.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
love learning about other cultures, so that's great.
Yeah, me too.
All right, I'm recommending a show. It's been done for a while now, but I only finished it recently. This is Loki season 2, the Marvel TV show about the once villain turned hero, Loki, and his travel through time, I guess is the way to put it.
That's a way to put
And
it.
yeah, and so this is a TV show. I think it's 10 episodes long or 8 episodes long, streaming on Disney Plus. And a lot of people I think were very highly critical of season 2. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. I did not have a problem with the fact that Loki was much more a hero than a villain. I did not have a problem with the fact that he was using time travel in a kind of wonky way. I thought it was really enjoyable and fun, and it worked for me. So if you are, those are some of the complaints that others had, but
Yeah.
I thought it was really fun. I thought the performances were fantastic. If you are a fan of Marvel content and Loki in particular, you could do a lot worse than Loki season 2. So that's my recommendation.
Yeah, it was so fun. I thought
Yeah,
that show was so good. So yeah, I second that recommendation myself.
cool. And honestly, I felt like, but by the time you get to the last couple episodes, it's like I don't know. It really had me like captivated. I was like, what's going to happen next, and how are they going to get out of that, and what are they going to do? So
Yeah,
I thought
absolutely.
they did a good job with that. So all right, I think that is all that I have to say about Loki, or brainwashing. And so I think, is there anything else before you'd like to add before we go?
No, I think that's it.
Perfect. All right. Well, then again, thank you for listening. This is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
We did it.
Yeah, we did it. All right. Let me export this. I'm going to take my dog out real quick and grab a snack, and then we will do the next episode if you have time to do that.
Yes, actually, I meant to say at the very end of that this was going to be our last episode of, or like full topic based episode of the year, and that we're going to do the wrap up next. But whatever, it's fine. We're here.
Yeah, it's fine. All right. And we are exporting now.
Sweet. Yeah, mine's currently
So
rolling.
fun. All right. I might have just broken our website, so that should be fun. Cool. I'll get this uploaded in a second. I'm gonna go do these things real quick.
I'm also going to go grab myself a little drink and maybe a snack because
A little tricky.
yeah.
All right,
All right.
cool. Well, patrons, thank you for being here.
Yeah. Thanks, patrons. See you in a sec. I mean,
We'll see
see
you
you
in
next
a
week.
second.